Chicago, Illinois, 1953. A man lifts a telephone receiver from its cradle. The weight surprises him. It's heavy, solid, almost 2 pounds of molded Bakelite plastic and steel. The cord coils tight and smooth. The rotary dial sits perfectly under his finger, each number hole precisely spaced. He places the receiver against his ear and hears the dial tone, a steady electrical hum that sounds like permanence itself. The phone is cold to the touch. The base doesn't wobble. When he sets the receiver back down, it makes a satisfying mechanical click, a sound of precision engineering. The bell inside the phone could ring loud enough to wake the entire house. This telephone has no off switch. It cannot be upgraded. It will never need charging. It was designed by engineers who studied 2,000 human faces to get the curve of the handset exactly right. It was built in a factory the size of a small city. And it was engineered to function perfectly for 50 years without a single repair. Western Electric built 93 million of these phones. They put one in nearly every American home. Then they disappeared completely. Did progress kill them? Or did we lose something we can never build again? Chapter 1. The monopoly nobody questioned. Before Western Electric built the phone that would sit in your grandmother's kitchen for half a century, they built the monopoly that made it possible. And for 70 years, almost nobody complained. The year was 1876. Alexander Graham Bell had just patented the telephone. But Bell was an inventor, not a manufacturer. He needed someone who could actually build the devices in volume, someone who understood metalwork, wiring, electrical components, and mass production. He found them in Chicago, a company called Western Electric, founded 7 years earlier by Enos Barton and Elisha Gray. They had been making telegraph equipment, electrical components, fire alarms, small precision devices that required skilled labor and attention to detail. In 1881, Western Electric became the exclusive manufacturing arm of the Bell Telephone Company. It was an arrangement that would last over a century. Bell designed the telephones and built the network. Western Electric manufactured every single component: the phones, the switches, the cables, the relays, everything. By 1900, Western Electric wasn't just a factory. It was an empire. They operated plants in Chicago, New York, Baltimore, Kansas City, Omaha, Indianapolis. They employed tens of thousands of workers, and they had a guaranteed customer, the Bell System, which was rapidly becoming the only telephone company in America. This was a monopoly, but it was a monopoly Americans accepted. The logic was simple. Telephones only worked if everyone used the same system. You couldn't have competing phone companies with incompatible equipment. Standardization wasn't just efficient, it was necessary. So the government allowed it. The Bell System controlled the phones, the lines, the network. Western Electric built everything. And Americans paid their monthly bill to Ma Bell without question, because the service worked, the phones never broke, and the alternative was chaos. But empires built on monopolies only last as long as the government allows them to, and in 1984, that protection would be ripped away. But we're getting ahead of the story. First, we need to understand what Western Electric actually built, and to understand that, we need to visit the factory where it all happened. If this kind of story matters to you, consider subscribing. There are many more worth telling. Chapter 2. The City Within a City. In 1905, Western Electric opened a factory complex in Cicero, Illinois, just outside Chicago, that would become one of the largest manufacturing facilities in the world. They called it the Hawthorne Works. To call it a factory is to misunderstand the scale. This was an industrial city. At its peak in the 1920s and 30s, the Hawthorne Works employed over 45,000 people. 45,000. That's more than the population of many American towns. The complex covered 200 acres. It contained over 90 buildings. 40 miles of railroad track ran through the facility to move materials and finished products. The factory had its own power plant, its own fire department, its own hospital, its own cafeterias that served 25,000 meals per day. Inside those buildings, workers manufactured every component of the telephone system. They drew copper wire, they molded plastic, they stamped metal parts, they wound coils, they assembled circuit boards, they tested every single piece before it left the factory. The scale of production was staggering. In the 1920s, Hawthorne Works was producing one telephone every 3 seconds. By the 1950s, production had increased even further. Millions of phones rolling off the assembly lines every year. Millions of switching components. Hundreds of thousands of miles of cable. But Western Electric didn't just build volume, they built quality. This wasn't an assembly line optimized for speed at the expense of durability. This was a factory designed to produce equipment that would last decades. Workers at Hawthorne weren't just assembling parts, they were craftsmen. Many of them had worked at the plant for their entire careers. Fathers trained sons. Skills were passed down through generations. The institutional knowledge embedded in that workforce was immeasurable. The factory operated 24 hours a day, 3 shifts. The night shift workers arriving as the day shift clocked out. The machinery never stopped. The production lines never paused. Hawthorne Works was a machine that manufactured machines, and it ran with a precision that reflected the products it created. And in 1949, that factory began producing the most iconic telephone in American history, the Model 500. Chapter 3. The phone designed to last forever. The Western Electric Model 500 rotary telephone wasn't just a product, it was a philosophy made physical, a belief that objects should be built so well that they never needed to be replaced. The man who designed it was named Henry Dreyfuss. He wasn't an engineer, he was an industrial designer, one of the pioneers of the field. Dreyfuss believed that good design wasn't about decoration. It was about function, ergonomics, and longevity. To design the Model 500, Dreyfuss and his team conducted a study that seems almost absurd by modern standards. They measured and photographed 2,000 human faces. They analyzed hand sizes, finger lengths, ear positions, jaw angles. They wanted to understand the exact curve that would make a telephone handset comfortable for the widest possible range of people. The result was a shape that felt perfect in your hand. The handset curved naturally from your ear to your mouth. The weight was balanced. The mouthpiece and earpiece were positioned exactly where they needed to be. When you picked up a Model 500, it felt like it had been designed specifically for you, because in a way, it had. But the genius of the Model 500 wasn't just the ergonomics. It was the engineering underneath. This phone was built like a piece of military equipment. The base was solid Bakelite plastic over a heavy steel chassis. The internal components were over-engineered to absurd degrees. Springs that could cycle 1,000,000 times. Contacts made of precious metals that wouldn't corrode. A ringer that could produce 100 decibels of sound. The rotary dial itself was a mechanical marvel. When you inserted your finger into a number hole and pulled the dial around, you were engaging a precisely calibrated governor mechanism. The dial would return at exactly the correct speed to send the proper electrical pulses to the telephone exchange. Too fast or too slow, and the call wouldn't connect. The mechanism had to be perfect. And it was, every single time. Western Electric tested these phones to destruction. They dropped them. They exposed them to extreme temperatures. They simulated years of daily use in accelerated tests. The design specification was clear. The phone must function for a minimum of 40 years of normal use without any maintenance whatsoever. Most of them lasted 50 years. Many still work today, 75 years after they were manufactured. The Model 500 went into production in 1949 and continued virtually unchanged until 1984. 35 years of continuous production. No planned obsolescence. No annual model updates. No new features to convince people to upgrade. Between 1949 and 1986, Western Electric manufactured 93 million Model 500 telephones. 93 million. That number doesn't include the Model 502 wall-mounted version or the dozens of other models Western Electric produced. Just the 500 desk phone alone. 93 million indestructible machines placed in homes, offices, and businesses across America. If you were born before 1980, you used one. Your grandmother had one on her kitchen wall. Your elementary school office had one on the principal's desk. The payphone you used to call home when you missed the bus was built by Western Electric. That sound, the mechanical clicking of the rotary dial, the bell ring so loud it could be heard from another room, the solid thunk when you hung up the receiver. An entire generation can close their eyes and hear those sounds perfectly. Western Electric didn't build phones. They built memories. But they were about to learn that building something perfect creates a problem. If nothing ever breaks, how do you stay in business? Chapter 4. The Problem with Perfection. By 1970, Western Electric faced a paradox that would eventually destroy them. They had built their products too well. The Model 500 telephone, along with the other Western Electric models in service, simply refused to die. Phones installed in the 1950s were still working perfectly 20 years later. No repairs, no replacements, nothing. They sat on desks and hung on walls, functioning exactly as they had the day they were installed. For customers, this was ideal. You paid a monthly rental fee to the phone company, and in exchange, you had a phone that never failed. If something did go wrong, which was rare, the phone company sent a repairman who fixed it for free. You never bought a phone. You never worried about a phone. It simply worked. But for Western Electric, this created a business problem. The replacement market was almost non-existent. Once every household had a phone, growth came only from population increase and new construction. The factory that could produce millions of phones per year was running out of customers. AT&T, Western Electric's parent company, understood this. But they weren't worried. They had the monopoly. They controlled the entire system. Western Electric didn't need to sell phones to consumers. They sold to AT&T, who rented them to customers. As long as the monopoly existed, the business model worked. The cost of that perfection was hidden in the monthly phone bill. Americans paid a rental fee for equipment that never wore out. They were, in effect, paying in perpetuity for a product that had been manufactured decades earlier and had long since paid for itself. But nobody complained. The system worked. The phones worked. And in America in the 1970s, having a working telephone was as essential as having running water. You didn't question it. Western Electric, meanwhile, continued manufacturing. The Hawthorne Works still employed tens of thousands. Other plants in Baltimore, Kearney, Indianapolis, Omaha kept running. The company diversified into other products. They made radar systems for the military. They manufactured components for early computers. They built satellite communications equipment. But the core of the business, the thing that employed the most workers and generated the most revenue, was still telephones. Rotary telephones that refused to break. Built in factories by workers who had perfected their craft over generations. And then the government decided that the monopoly had lasted long enough. Chapter 5. The breakup that broke everything. January 1st, 1984. The largest monopoly in American history was dismantled by court order, and Western Electric, which had existed as AT&T's manufacturing arm for over a century, suddenly had no guaranteed customer. The story of the AT&T breakup is complex, involving decades of antitrust lawsuits and regulatory battles. But the essential outcome was simple. AT&T, which had controlled virtually all telephone service in America, was split into 8 separate companies. 7 regional Bell operating companies, the Baby Bells, and AT&T itself, which kept the long-distance service and Western Electric. The theory was that competition would benefit consumers. The regional phone companies would compete for customers. Equipment manufacturers would compete to sell phones. Innovation would accelerate. prices would drop. What actually happened was more complicated. The regional phone companies, the Baby Bells, were no longer required to buy equipment exclusively from Western Electric. They could source phones from anyone, and they discovered that manufacturers in Asia were building telephones for a fraction of the cost. These new phones weren't built like the Model 500. They were made of lightweight plastic. They had electronic tone dialers instead of mechanical rotary dials. They were designed to last 5 years, maybe 10, before being replaced. They were cheap, and suddenly cheap mattered. For Western Electric, the impact was catastrophic. Orders from the Baby Bells dried up almost overnight. Why would they pay Western Electric prices for phones that lasted 50 years when they could buy Asian imports that lasted 10 years for 1/5 the cost? The business model that had sustained Western Electric for a century collapsed in less than 2 years. The factories began closing. In 1983, Western Electric employed over 153,000 people. By 1988, that number had been cut by more than half. Entire plants shut down. Tens of thousands of workers, many of whom had spent their entire careers building telephones, were laid off. The Hawthorne Works, which had employed 45,000 workers at its peak, began a painful decline. Buildings were closed. Production lines were dismantled. Workers who had followed their fathers and grandfathers into the factory found themselves with no place to go. In 1986, Western Electric was absorbed into AT&T Technologies. The name that had been synonymous with American telephone manufacturing for over a century disappeared from the corporate structure. The factories that remained open tried to adapt. They attempted to manufacture modern electronic equipment. They bid on contracts to build telecommunications gear for the regional phone companies. But they were competing against companies with lower labor costs, less overhead, and no legacy of engineering for permanence. One by one, the plants closed. Kearney, New Jersey; Baltimore, Maryland; Indianapolis, Indiana; Omaha, Nebraska; and finally, the Hawthorne Works itself. Chapter 6. The Ghost of Hawthorne. The Hawthorne Works didn't die all at once. It was a slow bleeding that lasted over a decade. In the early 1980s, the factory still employed thousands. By the late 80s, only a few buildings remained operational. By the mid-90s, production had ceased entirely. The machinery was sold for scrap. The buildings sat empty. For the workers who had spent their lives at Hawthorne, the closure was more than a job loss. It was the end of an identity. These were men and women who had taken pride in building the best telephones in the world. They had belonged to something that mattered. And now it was gone. The city of Cicero, which had grown around the factory, was devastated. Hawthorne Works had been the economic engine of the entire area. Local businesses that had served the factory workers, restaurants, bars, shops, closed their doors. Property values collapsed. The community that had been built on the strength of Western Electric manufacturing crumbled. The factory complex itself became a ruin. The buildings, which had once hummed with the sound of production, sat silent. Windows were broken, roofs leaked. Graffiti covered the brick walls. Scavengers stripped copper wiring and anything else of value. The site became a symbol of American industrial decline, a physical manifestation of what happens when the machines stop running. In the 2000s, the complex was finally demolished. Building after building torn down. The 90 structures that had once formed a city within a city were reduced to rubble and carted away. Today, a shopping center sits on part of the site. The rest is empty land. There is a small historical marker acknowledging that the Hawthorne Works once existed. That's all. The workers scattered. Some found jobs in other industries. Many never worked again. The skills they had spent a lifetime perfecting, the institutional knowledge of how to build a telephone that would last 50 years, became irrelevant. The world no longer wanted products that lasted 50 years. Chapter 7. The Phones That Refused to Die. The irony of Western Electric's collapse is that their products outlived the company by decades. And many of them still work today, a silent reproach to everything that came after. If you go to an antique store or an estate sale, you will find Model 500 telephones. 60, 70, 80 years after they were manufactured, many of them still function perfectly. Plug one into a modern phone line, assuming you can find the right adapter, and it will work. The dial tone will come through. You can make calls. The bell will ring. This is not normal. Modern consumer electronics are not designed to last 80 years. A smartphone is obsolete in 5. A laptop, maybe 7 or 8 if you're lucky. Even high-end appliances are engineered to fail within 10 to 15 years. But the Model 500 was designed in an era when the concept of planned obsolescence was just beginning to take hold in American industry. Western Electric engineers weren't thinking about replacement cycles or upgrade paths. They were thinking about building a tool that would do its job for as long as humanly possible. The phones that Western Electric built have become collector's items. Enthusiasts restore them, polish the bakelite, repair the cords, clean the rotary mechanisms. There are online communities dedicated to preserving these artifacts. People who remember the sound of the dial, the weight of the handset, the bell that could wake the dead. For those who grew up with these phones, they represent something more than telecommunications equipment. They represent a time when things were built to last, when quality mattered more than cost, when a company could take pride in engineering something so well that it would outlive the people who built it. But that era is gone. Western Electric is gone. The factories are gone. The workers are gone. And the idea that a product should be built to function for 50 years is considered economically irrational in the modern world. We replaced phones that lasted 50 years with phones that last 5. We call this progress. Chapter 8. What we lost when we threw it away. The story of Western Electric is not just about a company that built telephones. It's about a fundamental shift in how America makes things and what we expect from the things we make. When Western Electric designed the Model 500, they were not thinking about how to get customers to buy another phone in 5 years. They were thinking about how to build a phone so good that customers would never need to buy another one. This seems insane from a modern business perspective, but it made perfect sense in the context of the Bell System monopoly. The phone company didn't make money selling phones. They made money on the service, so building phones that never broke was actually good business. But after the AT&T breakup, that model collapsed. In a competitive market, companies make money by selling products. And you can't sell replacement products if nothing ever breaks. So the incentive structure changed. Suddenly, building something to last 50 years was a liability, not an asset. This shift wasn't unique to telephones. It happened across American manufacturing. Appliances, electronics, furniture, tools, everything became cheaper, lighter, more disposable. Products that once lasted a generation were replaced by products designed to last a few years before being thrown away and replaced. Western Electric couldn't compete in this new environment. Their factories were designed for quality, not cost. Their workers were trained to build things right, not build things fast. Their entire corporate culture was built on the idea that durability mattered. When durability stopped mattering, Western Electric had no reason to exist. The workers who built those phones carried a knowledge that is now gone. They knew how to calibrate a rotary dial mechanism so precisely that it would function perfectly for 50 years. They knew how to mold bakelite plastic that wouldn't crack or fade. They knew how to wind wire coils that wouldn't degrade. That knowledge died with the factories. You cannot simply restart that kind of manufacturing. It's not just about the equipment or the blueprints, it's about the accumulated wisdom of generations of workers who perfected a craft. When you close a factory like Hawthorne Works, you don't just eliminate jobs, you eliminate a culture. Today, we live in a world where the phone in your pocket is more powerful than the computers that sent men to the moon. But it will be obsolete in 5 years and probably broken in 3. The phone your grandmother had in her kitchen in 1960 worked in 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, and if someone kept it, it probably still works today. We gained convenience, features, connectivity. We lost permanence. The Model 500 telephone weighed 2 pounds. It was heavy because it was built from steel and bakelite and copper. It was heavy because it was real. When you picked it up, you felt the weight of engineering, the weight of craftsmanship, the weight of something that was built to matter. Today's phones weigh ounces. They are built from aluminum and glass and plastic. They are light because they are temporary. Western Electric built 93 million phones that were designed to last 50 years. We threw them away so we could buy phones that last 5. The factories are demolished. The workers are gone. The company is a footnote in telecommunications history, but the phones remain in attics, in basements, in antique stores, in the hands of collectors who remember. Solid, heavy, real. Waiting for someone to pick up the handset and hear, one more time, the dial tone that sounds like permanence. Did we make the right choice? Or did we trade something we can never build again for something we replace every few years? The phone that lasted 50 years is still here. The company that built it is not.